Hello and welcome to episode 104, the Monday Night Review, and we are officially 2 years old. Our second birthday was on the 17th. I was getting very complacent because I was up last night writing this episode and I thought I'm going to be all set for recording on Monday, which is the day I set aside to record it. But it's my beloved sister's birthday tomorrow, so I'm off on a jaunt for lunch. Then I'm out with friends for supper, which is very unlike me. So I'm recording it now. It's Sunday night. I'm in my office. I come in my office to record. It took ages to build. It's like a shed. We call it the shed in my garden. And it's divine. But the internet doesn't work. So while we wait to get a wire dug in, I mean, the internet where I live is absolutely horrendous. That I was saying to my husband, because I do a lot of content creation for work, I was like, I might as well content create for work, get the train up to London and spend the day at Waterloo Station just for the London internet. The internet here is shocking. It takes me about half an hour, if I'm lucky, to upload a TikTok or an Instagram video. So I come out here to record. It's also our spare room. We're very lucky we've got a bathroom out here, so it is useful. And I come out here to record and have some peace and quiet. But also it's just filled with clothes that I'm selling on Vinted. Anyone else obsessed with Vinted? I'm so obsessed with Vinted. So it's Sunday evening. It's been really sunny here today. So it feels really warm in here. And the big pod dog's at my feet. I can hear the birds singing. The garden's looking pretty good. Foxgloves are coming out. It's not bad for a Sunday evening, I have to say. Today's episode, actually, I think a lot of people who are going to talk about today's episode or who are interested in what I'm going to be talking about today get hooked in on one particular event in it and then realise it's part of a bigger story. Today we're going to talk about the Bennington Triangle. And I had heard about the Bennington Triangle for ages, and I thought it was a bit like the Bermuda Triangle. Now, I will probably cover the Bermuda Triangle, but so far, I don't find anything too sinister about it. Anything to do with the sea or aeroplanes, I'm a little bit suspicious of anyway. I think they're eerie and weird. So that's one thing. So when I read about the Bennington Triangle, I was like, And then I became obsessed with the case of James Tedford and realised that it was just part of the bigger story. So let's get into it. In November 1943, 37-year-old Carl Herrick was hunting with his cousin Henry, 16 kilometres northeast of Glastonbury Mountain in Vermont. The two get separated and Carl seemed to just vanish. Henry searched, but eventually that evening contacted authorities and reported Carl's disappearance. The search continued for 3 days, and then searchers found Herrick's body 70 foot from the campsite the cousins had set up. His gun was nearby, leaning against a tree with no bullets discharged, and bear tracks were found in the area. This could just have been chalked up to being an unfortunate surprise bear attack, where he didn't get a chance to reach for his gun, except for the cause of death. The autopsy determined that the cause of death was squeezing. His ribs had broken and punctured his lung. Now, of course, a bear has the power to squeeze someone to death. They're incredibly strong. But I think they tend to maul you. I have a real thing about bears. I think I'm more scared of bears than any other animal. I grew up with my dad telling us a story of a friend of his two friends of his who went camping in America, and one of them gets eaten by a bear. It's a true story, and it just obviously stayed with me. And they're just so big. They're so big, they're fast, some of them can climb, and they don't care if you're dead before they start eating you, and their feet are the size of my torso. So from what I can tell, I don't like to go too far into researching it because of the stories that I have seen are just, for me, horrifying for anyone, but for me with the slight bear thing, it's really awful. But I should imagine that normally if someone is killed by a bear, they're either killed by a bear who then eats a bit of them or some of them or how much ever the bear fancies, or you're kind of mauled by the big bear paws. I would think it would be unusual for a bear to squeeze someone to death and not leave obvious bear claw marks on them. Now, the locals are not hugely concerned. Carl Herrick's death only contributed to the legendary sightings of a creature resembling Bigfoot that had supposedly haunted the woods since the 19th century. In fact, Glastonbury Mountain lies in the centre of what is known as the Bennington Triangle, and Carl's death is, for some, the first in a series of strange disappearances in the area over the next decade. Purists will overlook Carl's death in discussions about the Bennington disappearances because his body has been found and a definitive cause of death given, even if that cause of death is slightly weird. The Bennington Triangle is a term coined by author Joseph A. Citro and refers to a region in southwestern Vermont that has become synonymous with a series of bizarre disappearances and unexplained phenomena. The area encompasses the towns of Bennington and Glastonbury and has garnered a reputation for being a hotbed of supernatural occurrences. Glastonbury was once a small logging community but was abandoned at the end of the 19th century, and the area is now largely untouched wilderness. According to Native American law, Glastonbury Mountain, the centre of the Bennington Triangle, is cursed, and one legend of the Algonquin people involves a stone hidden in the depths of the mountain that swallows anyone who stumbles upon it. The stories surrounding the Bennington Triangle are truly fascinating and eerie. For many, the first disappearance was in 1945, exactly 2 years after the disappearance and death of Carl Herrick. 74-year-old Middy Rivers was an experienced hiker, hunting guide, and he was walking a familiar trail he had done numerous times before. He was leading a group of 4 hunters, and he went ahead to a place called Hell Hollow Brook, saying he would meet them for lunch. Then he disappeared. Many, including his son-in-law who had been on the hunting party with him, were hopeful that if he had got lost, which was really unlikely, he would be fine surviving in the wilderness and would return to town. He didn't. Despite extensive search for him with firemen, local volunteers, and eventually the US Army looking for Rivers over the next month, no evidence is found. The only clue they find is one rifle cartridge in a river, assumed to have fallen from his pocket as he bent over. No sign of him has ever been found, and the case remains unresolved to this day. And that's just the beginning. The strange disappearance of Paula Weldon in December 1946 captured the nation's interest and became arguably the most famous missing persons case in Vermont's history. Paula, an 18-year-old sophomore at Bennington College, the eldest of 4 daughters, hadn't gone home for Thanksgiving weekend, and on Sunday the 1st of December, decided to find and hike along a portion of the Long Trail, a popular hiking route that traverses the heart of the Bennington Triangle. It's 273 miles, that's 439 kilometres long. No one's around to go with her, so she finishes her shift at the college dining hall, puts on her walking clothes and sets out. It's about 10 degrees Celsius when she leaves, which is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But that night it would drop to minus 12, that's 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And she takes with her no extra clothes or cash or anything that would imply that Paula was planning to leave. She was last seen wearing a noticeably bright red jacket and was seen by many witnesses on the way to her walk on Sunday the 1st of December. We know that Paula walked down the campus driveway and hitched a ride from State Route 67A near the college entrance to a point on State Route 9 near the Furnace Bridge between downtown Bennington and the Woodford Hollow. Local contractor Louis Knapp picked her up and drove her as far as his house on Route 9, about 2.5 miles from the Long Trail. From this point, Paula either hitched or walked the rest of the way to the start of the trail in Woodford Hollow. We know that she did make it there as a group of hikers were walking down the trail as Paula was walking up. She approached them and asked them a few questions about the long trail and then continued walking in a northerly direction on the portion of the trail now known as Harbour Road. This was late in the afternoon and darkness was falling as she approached the end of Harbour Road. She may have continued into quickly darkening woods along the Bowlsbrook Valley, although there are no known confirmed sightings of her past Faye Fuller Camp. When she didn't return home, her roommate assumed she'd gone to the library to study for exams that were coming up, but when she didn't show up for her classes on Monday, the county sheriff was called in. The campus was searched and a notice put in the Bennington Banner paper where she was identified by the hikers who'd seen her who came forward. An intense search began, which even involved the college closing for a few days so students and faculty members could help search. Hundreds of volunteers, family members, National Guard troops and firefighters searched on the ground and in the air as far away as Glastonbury Mountain, 10 miles to the north, with extra focus on the woods near where she was last seen. Nothing at all was found. Remember, she's wearing this bright red coat. Nothing. And they must be taking into account how fast someone can walk, the known area that she was walking into. Theories arose which include her eloping with a secret lover or that she died by suicide, but neither of these would make sense. She had no reasons to lose touch with her wealthy, close-knit family, and why leave with no possessions and no money? Even if you're eloping, you're already at college. It's a quiet weekend at the college because lots of people are away for Thanksgiving. Why not get picked up? Get picked up at the end of the driveway. Why walk and hitch all that way if you're going to meet up with someone? That makes no sense. If I was eloping, I have stuff I wouldn't want to go out without. I'd take my wallet. She has none of that stuff with her. We also know that she wasn't depressed, and I know that that's not an indicator of suicide, but she wasn't. There was no mood change. There's no evidence of her in the woods where they were searching. It was obviously something that was taken into consideration, and that was looked at in the search. At the time of her disappearance, there was no state police organisation in Vermont, and officers had to be sent in from Connecticut, which slowed down the search. There was one suspect in the case, a lumberjack called Fred Guedet, who lived along Harbour Road and had been in the middle of an argument with his girlfriend when he'd seen Paula walk by. Not long after, he'd stormed off and, depending on different statements he made, went to his shack and spent the evening by himself, or drove up the portion of the trail where Weldon was heading. Guedet lied to the police on several occasions and was a person of interest both in 1946 and when the case was revisited in 1952. Reportedly, Guedet told at least 2 people that he knew within 100 feet where Paula was buried, but would later claim that that had been just idle talk, which to me is just ridiculous. I've spoken to a lot of idiotic men before. None of them have ever claimed to know where a body is buried. And I've had loads of people who find out. The thing I think you really notice when you don't drink is when you're with people who have been drinking, the number of drunk men who tell me stuff when they find out I do this podcast and they're like, oh, do you know about this murder? Do you know about that murder? Not one of them has been like, oh, I know something. It's not idle talk. When no evidence was found that a crime had been committed, no bodies discovered, and no forensic clues were identified, there was no way the police could move forward with this line of investigation. But for me, I think it's weird that she takes all this time to get to this trail, that she's hiking into woods as it gets dark and it's probably bloody -12, is really cold. I think it's weird. She's noticed by this man who has a history of abuse, who then lies to the police and changes his story, who then later on says to people that he knows where her body is buried. To me, this is, obviously it's strange, but to me, I can't see past this cadet. I think he saw an opportunity. He was angry. He'd had a fight with his girlfriend. He had a history of violence. He took it out on Paula, buried her body in the woods. And to be fair, the fact that maybe it was spur of the moment might mean that he didn't have any evidence. He didn't have a murder kit. He didn't take a memento. He went out, took his anger out on this beautiful young girl he saw walking past. And that was that. That's all speculation, of course. Now, despite an intensive search, Paula was never found and her disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. Criticism over the way police handled the case led to the founding of the Vermont State Police in July 1947. But the weird goings-on at the Bennington Triangle were about to get weirder, with the disappearance that first piqued my interest in this whole story. I feel like the cases we've talked about so far are weird. I think Carl Heddick being squeezed to death is sinister. Midi Rivers, again, is very strange that a man of that ability disappeared. I've seen it written down that he said to his brother-in-law, I'm going this way down the road, you go that way and I'll catch up with you. And I wonder whether he knew he was ill and just wanted to go. I think that something nefarious happened to Paula, but this one really gets me. So, James E. Tedford lived with his wife Pearl in Fletcher, Vermont, and they seemingly had a very happy, comfortable life, and he is then called up to serve in World War II. When he returns, he finds his home empty, no sign of Pearl. A meal is left on the kitchen table and neighbours say that they saw her going to the shop that day, but she didn't return. She went to the shop on the day that her husband returned from the war. She disappears on that day. I find that very weird. The fact that she disappears, of course, I'm sure there are numerous women whose lives improved beyond measure when their husbands went to war. I know that the reverse is true, but I feel like there must be a lot of women whose lives improved and who did disappear so that when their husbands came home, they didn't find their wives, but I don't think Pearl is one of these. Why is the meal on the table? Why not go? He's going to come back at some point. Why not go sooner? He doesn't seem to be a difficult husband. Why not wait until he gets back and say, it's just not working for me. They'd also been in contact while he'd been away. He really loves his wife. This disappearance really affects him. He's very sad. He's very depressed. He's in his late 50s, early 60s. And he never really gets over the disappearance of his wife. I found it difficult to track down any information about what happened in terms of searching for her. We focus on James, but there's not a lot of focus on Pearl. So whether people think she ran off with another man and her husband coming, do you know what I mean? It could be that she'd been having an affair with another man. She'd been affectionately writing letters to her husband who was away at war, who she'd been married to for a long time. And she gets a telegram saying, I'm on my way back. And she just ups and goes off with her other man. We don't know whether that's been discovered and it's not discussed, Or is Pearl another victim of the Bennington Triangle? But either way, James is very depressed, and he moves into the Bennington soldiers' home. And then on the 1st of December 1949, he takes a bus from Bennington to St Albans City to visit family, and it's a long journey. He spends the day with them, and then his family take him back to the bus stop at St Albans City, stay with him until he gets on the bus home. There are 14 other passengers on the bus, and James stays on the bus the whole time. I don't know how long this bus journey was, but I think perhaps that at the stops you could get off and get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, go to the loo, etc. But he didn't. He stayed on the whole time. And witnesses say he was still on the bus at the penultimate stop. So Bennington, his stop, is the final stop. And at the penultimate stop, we have people saying he's still on the bus. By the time the bus reaches Bennington, the only sign of James is his luggage and an open bus timetable on his seat. Somewhere between the second to last stop and the end of the route, James has vanished. This is the case that a lot of people say, is alien abduction or something supernatural. And I don't know. I don't know what the bus was like. Could he have jumped out of the window? I feel like perhaps the driver would have noticed. How effective a form of ending it all is jumping out of a bus window. I think you're more likely to just get some pretty horrible injuries. It is the one for me that I'm a bit like, oh, you can't disappear off a bus. It's very strange. Of course, maybe people were mistaken. They saw the bus timetable. They saw the luggage and thought, oh, he's asleep on his chair, and they didn't actually see him. But I do think that's very strange. Then in 1950, an 8-year-old, Paul Jepson, goes to work with his mother, and she has to feed some pigs. And she gives him strict instructions not to leave the car. He's got to play in their car while she gets out. She's not going to be too long. But she ends up being gone for about an hour. And when she gets back to the car, he's gone. She checks everywhere to see if he's got out of the car to play. While he waited for her, she can't find him. A huge team of volunteers come out to look for this little boy. Police, military, nothing. They don't find anything. No trace of this child is ever found. I've seen reports that he too was wearing a red jacket. As always, there's numerous rumours and theories. One story claims that the bloodhounds traced Paul as far as the road where Paula Walden was last seen, Harbour Road, and that both of them have therefore been kidnapped and murdered. Paul's father told the Albany Times Union paper that it was, quote, the lure of the mountains that had caused his child to disappear, saying that Paul had talked of nothing else for days. But an 8-year-old? I have an 8-year-old who disappears. My 8-year-old is a real handful. And he does get lost. He has got lost. He's terrifying. I have to go on all school trips with him because he's like an eel. I'm fairly sure he would stop and shout for me. Partly, I don't know how other people are with their kids, but because they grew up in London and we used to go on the tube, and I used to have this horror of them getting on the tube and me not being able to get on, or vice versa. And I always said, just stand still. If you get on the tube and your grown-up doesn't get on the tube, get off at the next stop and stand still. Just stand still. So I would hope that if he had got out of the car and gone somewhere to play or run about and he'd realised he was lost, he would stand still and he would shout for me. So I don't know. There's something for me about this where they obviously did use bloodhounds to track him and he's still not found. We have to assume that he stayed in the car for a while. So his mother was gone for an hour. So let's say he stayed in the car for 15 minutes? Did he go straight out to the mountains? He's got a maximum 45-minute head start on 8-year-old legs. I just find it, I don't know. Again, it's really sinister. He could have been carried off by a bear. Bears don't eat clothes, though. I feel like some evidence would have been found of this little boy, and the hunt was huge. And unlike an adult, I feel like there's only so far an 8-year-old can go with no water, no food, and realising they're lost and all of that. But nothing. Now, just as the Carl Herrick case at the beginning of the episode is sometimes discounted as being involved, so too is the final case we're going to talk about. On the 28th of October, 1950, just 16 days after Paul Jepson has vanished, 53-year-old Frieda Langer and her cousin Herbert Elsner left the family campsite near the Somerset Reservoir, also part of the Long Trail, to go on a hike. During the journey, Langer slips and falls into a stream, and she climbs out and she tells her cousin that he should wait there. She's going to run back to the campsite, change into dry clothes, and catch up with him. When she doesn't return, Elsner makes his way back to the campsite and discovers that Frieda never returned and that nobody had seen her since they'd left. Again, the search was huge. The Vermont Aeronautics Commission, the Connecticut Coast Guard, and the US Army in Massachusetts all sent helicopters and airplanes to help. Up to 400 people, including members of the Massachusetts National Guard, thoroughly investigated the area, but the search turned up nothing of Langer, and all came up empty-handed. Again, she's not going for a walk on her own. She's going from one spot to another spot in cold, wet clothes. A very odd disappearance. On the 12th of May, 1951, Frieda Langer's body was found 3.5 miles from the campsite in the eastern branch of the Deerfield River. It gets a bit confusing, the next bit, about where she's found. It seems to be that she'd either been found in an area that was open and heavily searched before, but then some say that it was only lightly searched 7 months previously. But in some I've read, it implies that she was moved. Obviously, she's in quite a state of decomposition. But in some things I've read, it sounds like they believed her body was moved into this open area. Whether it was not that thoroughly searched, but because it's an open area. So obviously you can imagine, if you look, there's a big difference. If you get a huge field and you're looking, you may not look at every centimetre of the field, but you would notice if there was a body in the middle of it, and then suddenly her body's in the middle of a field. I kind of get the feeling that is the situation. Now, no cause of death could be determined because the condition of her remains were not great. But because her remains were found, those who like to think that something supernatural, alien is going on in the Bennington Triangle don't link this to the disappearances. I don't know whether her clothes were found. Again, it could be animal problems. I mean, it could be animals. She's quite far away from her campsite. Did she get lost on her way? These are all autumnal happenings. So that's another thing to be taken into consideration. The disappearances in the Bennington Triangle weren't limited to humans. There's several cases of missing pets that add mystique to the area, and it doesn't end there. There have been reports of strange lights in the sky, unexplained sounds, and a general feeling of unease that permeates the region and predates colonial settlements. The local Native Americans have long believed that the Bennington Triangle holds a deep spiritual significance. Some speculate that these vanishings could be connected to an ancient folklore and legends surrounding the area. Others believe there may be a more rational explanation, such as harsh weather conditions or dangerous wildlife. But bears don't eat clothes, do they? So I feel like, especially with Paula and Paul, both who are wearing bright red coats, these coats would be found as an indicator that, sadly, a bear or an animal has taken them. And a bear didn't sneak onto the bus, silently eat James Tedworth, and then sneak off again. The truth, however, remains elusive. Hikers may have got lost in the vastness of the forest, and people continue to lose their way even today. But it doesn't explain when people who know the area know how to get back from where they came from, and they just vanished. Others have theorised that a serial killer may have been active, but there seems to be no pattern between the victims and those who've disappeared. And it seems really unlikely. The dates for me is something interesting, but I discount the serial killer thing. I believe that Paula Weldon was murdered. But I don't believe that a serial killer sort of waits for a man on a bus and then a kid in the mountain and then another woman. He just hopes she's going to fall into the river. Obviously, serial killers have operated on hiking trails before, but it's not consistently in a similar area in a similar way. Now, the dates for me are very interesting. The 1st of December, Paula Weldon and James Tedford go missing. In October, Paul Jepson and Frida Langer go missing. In November, Middy Rivers and Carl Heddick disappear. Practically speaking, it could be that more than one of these disappearances is down to hypothermia. We know from the Paula Weldon case that it gets very cold. It was -12 the night that she disappeared. And one of the last stages of people can experience in hypothermia is called terminal burrowing, where people try to dig into the ground or somewhere small to sort of burrow down and hide themselves to save themselves. But it's too late by the time they do it, but it does obviously make them very difficult to find. But Paul Jepson was missing long before nightfall. And so for me, I don't believe that. For me, that's what's strange, is that I just feel like scared children call for their mums. She was looking for him. They were all looking for him. He must have been terrified. And they were looking for him before it would have got too cold, I think. Another theory is that there were a lot of unmarked mine shafts in the area that are treacherous for hikers, and they could have fallen down them. I mean, that's a very real possibility. Seems strange that with all these people conducting all these searches, none of them fell down a mine shaft, and if they came across them, I'm assuming they would have looked down them. The Bennington Triangle continues to intrigue and captivate both locals and paranormal enthusiasts alike, and podcasters. It serves as a reminder that there are still places in this world that defy explanation, where the line between reality and the unknown blurs. And until we uncover the truth behind these perplexing events, the secret of the Bennington Triangle will continue to haunt our imaginations. And indeed, some people hold that so far there are over 40 disappearances in the Bennington Triangle over numerous decades. And that is the story of the Bennington Triangle. I absolutely love this. I could have done an 8-parter on it because there's just loads and loads of little weird details, but I actually really wanted to do it as a whole, and I feel like if you split it up and did it in parts, you'd lose that feeling of this one decade. Yes, people say over 40 people over numerous decades, but this is the real crux, where it's sort of specific times of year over this 10-year period where experienced people are dying with no reason, and other people are disappearing, and it is incredibly strange. But as I said, the James Tedford case for me is the one that really hooked me in. I'd love to know which one you'd dig deeper on. If I do, I will give you an update. Thanks so much to everyone who sends me a message. I absolutely love it. And to everyone who's bought a t-shirt or a hoodie. If you haven't had a look, go and check it out. There's a link in the notes below. You can message me wherever you're listening to this. I'm sure you can message me, but you can also send me an email at themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. Remember that review is spelled REVUE. You can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seats before you drive. Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod, and this is the Monday Night Review.